Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Armen Mkrtchyan. I'm a senior principal at Flagship Pioneering. I lead our Pioneering Intelligence Initiative. We develop foundational ML capabilities for Flagship, and we also explore novel ideas for computationally focused new companies. We have a very distinctive group of leaders today participating in this panel on AI and future of healthcare and biotech. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Next to me, we have Mike Nally, who is the CEO of Generate Biomedicines and the CEO partner at Flagship Pioneering. Next to Mike, we have Turabi, who is a partner in McKinsey's healthcare practice out of Boston office. Rory Kelleher, who is from NVIDIA. And next to Rory, we have Jonathan Carlson, who is from Microsoft. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for finding time for this.
Thanks, Armen.
Thanks for having us.
I would like to jump into our first question. In terms of AI history, if I'm not mistaken, in 70s and then also in 80s and 90s, there were a couple of AI winters. I think last few years have been probably very different than what we described as AI winters. We might look back at it and say it was an AI summer or AI spring. There have been many exciting developments, especially in the kind of tech space related to artificial intelligence. I'd love for each of you to reflect a bit on your favorite developments in the last year or last few years. And Mike, maybe we'll start with you, and I'd also love for you to talk a bit more about Generate Biomedicines before you start.
Well, I think my answer will, show my inherent bias in this space. I'm Mike Nally, CEO of Generate Biomedicines. Joined the organization roughly 2 years ago, largely, based on the fact that I became a fervent believer that it was going to be the intersection of science and technology that would help us understand biology in ways that we've never been able to understand it. And I think over the course of the past few years, the progress has exceeded even the loftiest of expectations. We're seeing fundamental insights that offer the prospect of migrating drug discovery from what has been an artisanal craft into a much more engineerable endeavor. And if you can do that, truly it'll be revolutionary for the next generation of therapeutics. Generate kind of gives away probably what you think my most interesting observation is, because I think generative AI is transforming many fields, and we've watched a huge sea shift from thinking of AI as an analytical tool to now seeing it as an ability to augment creativity. And we've been able to see that within the generative biology space with some of the diffusion models to recreate proteins. And we recently published our protein diffusion model, Chroma, on December 1st, and that's allowing us to now explore biology in ways that we've never had the tools to explore it. So I think it's a really exciting time, and I think over the course of the next few years, we're going to see even greater innovations.
Great, thank you, Mike. And now tell us a bit more about the work you do at McKinsey, types of clients you serve, and what are some of the exciting advancements you would like to note?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the work I do is, I kind of sometimes think I have one of the best jobs in the world. I get to partner with the best organizations, some of the brightest thinkers, as they try and actually make a reality of some of the promise of artificial intelligence, data science, and technology in healthcare more broadly. And that's everything from, hey, how do you prepare an argument for a board of a very well-established kind of old school pharma company to really rethink the investment envelope it's going to make available for this kind of investment in artificial intelligence, right the way through to, hey, how do you help a super sort of whip-smart, very disruptive organization that's trying to shift the business model around drug development and discovery? How do you help them through that challenging maturation process? So it's phenomenal. Like, we just get to be there with a bunch of really sort of high potential and high impact potential organizations as they try and make a reality. Look, I think the stuff that I'm most excited about, and Mike, you made some great points, just this shift towards the contribution that generative models make, the idea that artificial intelligence can do more than just allow us to identify patterns or more flexibly convert statistical models into inferential insights. The fact that we can actually now, I guess the thing that excites me the most almost isn't the technological element of this, it's the people element. And it's the social shift that we've seen in the last couple of years. And I think about three things here. I think about the pool of professionals who are now graduating, coming through our master's and PhD programs into industry, and watching them seriously angle towards bioscience as a place that they want to be. And honestly, there's a school of thought that says the investment winter, the tech winter of some of the consumer technology companies, that's leading to a massive sort of offboarding of technical talent. Great opportunity for life sciences. We've seen time and time again the industry struggle to achieve its potential because it can't get the right people in. So really excited by the human capital story that's coming through, but also just the social acceptability, just the general awareness of what artificial intelligence can do is really, really shifting. And I'm sure we're going to come on to our favorite innovation of the last few years, but ChatGPT, the availability of large language models and the awareness that brings really now is changing the temperature of the conversation right the way through. So I'm really excited for what that does to the acceleration of the adoption of some of these techniques and tools, what that means for the way that regulators begin to think about this thing, what that means about how the broader investment community looks to allocate capital in these spaces. I actually think the people story here is a huge plus for us going forwards.
Great, thank you, Nas. Rory, first, congratulations. I know you have recently been asked to lead NVIDIA's life science and healthcare enterprise business in Americas. Yep. I think we have had worked with us for some time, so I'm very excited for both you and also us to be continuing this relationship. Can you tell us a bit more about what you do at NVIDIA? Also, what are the advances that you are excited about?
Absolutely. So our mission at NVIDIA Healthcare and Life Sciences in particular is to bring the state of the art of what's happening across the industry in computation and AI and help apply it to the domain of healthcare and life sciences. And I think that is a novel mission. It's a challenging mission. There's a lot of exciting things that are happening, call it in consumer tech, as we've seen with GPT. Very, very exciting space. I think what I'm most excited about is some of the work that Generate and some others are starting to think about is how do we take these same techniques and apply it to the domain of healthcare specifically, and moving biology from what largely was as you've put it, kind of like a creative space that really required a ton of domain expertise to effectively an engineering problem. And I think that's what's super, super exciting is, and I'm going to blank on who I should attribute this to, but I heard somebody say, much like math was to physics and helping us being able to break down and understand the governing rules around us, artificial intelligence and deep learning is to biology. We finally have a tool that starts to move us towards a paradigm shift of being able to break biology down into an engineering science. So that is super, super exciting for us. And then just on a personal level, like it's fun to go around at holiday parties and pull up Chat-GPT and say, look at this is amazing. I'm often thinking about it.
Joke.
Oh, totally. I'm thinking about how I can integrate it in my day-to-day life. So it's a massively, massively exciting time. And from where we were 3 years ago, where generative AI was all about generative adversarial networks to create some new and interesting data sets outside of the distribution, to where we are now, where we're literally making paradigm shifts from text to image to video, and in our world, sequence to structure, sequence to function. That is just super, super exciting space. So, and it's only accelerating. It's only accelerating. So very, very exciting.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, as a partner and general manager at Life Sciences and Microsoft, tell us a bit more about Microsoft Health Futures and your role, and also what are the advances you are excited about?
Yeah, so I'm part of Microsoft Research, which has been around since early 90s. Basically, goal is to advance state-of-the-art of computer science and ensure the future of Microsoft, right? I've been doing computational biology at Microsoft since 2006, so we've been investing in the space for a long time. In fact, I was doing generative models back then. It was, at that point, it was generating viruses, modeling how viruses evolve, how they evolve with response to the immune system. So this is old hat for Microsoft on one level, but of course now we're finally at a point where we really see the potential for really cloud scale AI to start transforming the industry and really realizing the promise of actually making lives better by speeding up the pace at which we not only discover new interventions, but also deliver them. So that, in a nutshell, is what Health Futures is all about. It's how do we think, anchored in computer science, which is our core, how do we work with partners in life sciences and healthcare and really help realize that future in such a way that we can then, through the ecosystem of Microsoft, really scale that globally. Yeah, in terms of what we're excited about for AI, I mean, like I said, I've been in this space forever. I love what Denali said about how in the last year we've really seen the ability for AI to move from a very esoteric theoretical space to a place where companies like Mike's are fundamentally pulling together AI researchers, computational biologists of every flavor, and really being able to connect the human stack between the biological expertise on the one hand, the AI expertise, and then really being able to translate that. The other place I think a lot about why have generative models changed so much from when I was training to now is fundamentally about access to trained labeled data. That was always the problem, right? Like, how many people could you hire a mechanical Turk to actually label your data sets? Well, in biology, that wasn't even possible. And really, when I look at it, one of the big fundamental breakthroughs was the ability to basically automatically generate training data through various forms of self-supervision, whether it's diffusion models that are effectively doing that, whether it's the mass models that allow you to effectively take everything available and use it to make some sort of training data. And that's really what has caused the sea change, and it's been super fun and in some cases disorienting over the last year to watch what emerges when you do that, to watch how you take ideas that came from language and apply them to cell state or to, of course, proteins and see what starts to emerge. And there's a lot we still need to learn there. There's a lot that we don't understand. There's a lot that doesn't work out as well as we think it should when we start, but it's a very exciting time for sure.
Great. So maybe, Jonathan, I'll just continue on the same thread. So generative models, as all of you mentioned, made AI mainstream for almost everyone. What are we lacking to make AI mainstream for personalized medicine? Or are we actually lacking anything? Maybe it's just a matter of time.
I guess it depends on what you mean by personalized medicine, right? Like, I can imagine there's going to be lots of low-hanging fruit to take ChatGPT and put it in different contexts. As soon as we get to life sciences, now we start thinking about how are we understanding the underlying mechanisms that are happening? How do we actually verify what predictions are? These things hallucinate all the time. You know, for the most part with language, we can tell, although that's an open question, I think. But when we're in life sciences, fundamentally we're about trying to understand something new and discover new truth that we as humanity don't know. And so how do we close that loop in really interesting ways? And I think companies, as a society, as a field, start figuring out how do we not only understand the uncertainty, but then learn how to quickly inject information back into that system is when we're really going to start moving forward.
Yeah. Rory, what do you think?
Yeah, I think about a few things in terms of how we kind of make this leap. I think, biology is just a huge, massively complex space. In the grand scheme of things, have we actually generated that much biological data sets yet? Probably not, right? So a key fundamental ingredient for success with AI anywhere is, do you have enough data, especially when we're talking about these large language models or perhaps diffusion models, where we've continued to show that the more data you throw at it, the larger you make these models, the better they are at performing a number of different tasks. So I think that's one thing I think about. I think the other thing that I think about is, as you mentioned, Anis, is just the pipeline of talent. Like right now, talent is either consolidated in certain areas or maybe not as dense as we would like it to be. So I think that's one thing I often think about. I do think there's still some things that we need to do along the lines of validation too. I think you look at NeurIPS, there was a lot of generative work that came out, especially in the world of biology, and I think there's still steps to be taken, and I'm sure leaders in this space are working on it, and in fact are probably starting to publish on it. It's been a busy week, so I haven't seen some papers that have perhaps come out this week. But I think that is probably the next step is showing not only can we come up with some really interesting in silico generations, but we put them into the wet lab and they do what we expect them to do. So I think that's just the next step, and then there's many other steps that I think will come after.
And how, just following up on that, Rory, how do you make sure that the consumers are aware of the advancements that are happening in medicine? I think it's much easier when you're generating images and then everyone is generating their avatars, everyone is typing in ChatGPT, but it's very different compared to that when you are actually even working on medicine, and then people are like, why isn't this contributing to our health benefits? But all that we are doing is using these great tools to generate images that, well, they are cool, but they are not necessarily as useful.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think on one end, what we're seeing in the consumer tech space is helping all of us kind of make that leap from, how can this actually be applied to biology? So I think, just being able to understand and grasp what's happening from a broad technology standpoint, and then applying that with a lens of biology, I think is really good. On the other hand, at the end of the day, patients don't care, right? Patients don't care how something gets generated. It's if you ask, how modern medicine has been delivered today, there's a very few fraction of patients that understand how it took place. So, but I think in large part, just storytelling, becoming more comfortable, these AI techniques are going to become integrated in our day-to-day lives, and so it's not going to be too much of a leap for people to kind of understand how you go from nothing to something in the world of biology.
Yeah, great, thank you. Anas and Mike, a question for both of you. So AI has generally, especially I think maybe through Generate's lens, Mike, has been looked at as something that helps make drugs much more efficient, cheaper, faster. Does AI also enable new business models that we haven't thought about?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, when you make this transition that we were talking about, from artisanal craft to engineering, it introduces a new scalability dimension entirely, right? If you're relying on an individual or a team of geniuses, that's really hard to scale. When you're relying on computation, that's very easy to scale. And so I think in many respects, some of the productivity challenges associated with research this offers the prospect of cracking those sort of challenges and taking advantage of the scalability of technology. We see it within our organization. We're able to start, we can generate sequences almost instantaneously. We can work on, 15 to 20 programs with a group of about 200. That was about comparable to the output of my former employer with about 72,000 employees. And so, these rules are being changed as we put computational techniques at the center of some of these processes. It doesn't remove the need for the individual genius. In some ways, that's actually as important, if not more important, picking the right targets to go after, thinking about where we want to take the technology over time. But inevitably, this productivity change will force us to think radically different about business models, about access models, because ultimately, if you can solve productivity, you can then think about how we get more medicines to patients, which I think is, why a lot of us do what we do.
Good, thank you. Anas?
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I almost want to take it a step further. It's not just that can AI enable new business models, but actually AI-driven drug development, especially kind of what's coming at the stage that you're working at, research, getting to a hit to lead, getting those molecules forwards, demands that the next step of the change also completely has to revolutionize. If you do a great job at what you do, you just create huge headaches for me if I'm responsible for the clinical development, right? And it's just, the thing I worry about actually more than anything else is we've put all of this energy and effort into this really hard problems of fundamental biology and improving our through flow of potential opportunities for us to do great things for patients. And then you come into this clinical development domain, and whereas this is now 21st, heading 22nd century, we're still stuck somewhere in the, pick your number, I'm not going to say it out on camera, right? If we don't innovate there as well, what happens to all of this potential? So there's a real need there, and there's a real opportunity. And again, a lot of the work that we do is working with organizations that operate right across that full spectrum. And it's been really interesting trying to get them to think more creatively about what would this look like at the clinical level? What's it like when you've got human level data? And then how do you map that out? So there are some really hard problems downstream that AI will make a huge contribution to. And almost the thing that we're excited about, we're beginning to see, and some of these are entities in the Flagship family, are organizations that try and take that whole lens approach. And they say, hey, well, what would it mean if I could use the same kind of precision approaches to understanding likelihoods of success right the way through, even to payment model innovation. Totally. And the rate at which we might innovate is going to move at different speeds. I'm not quite sure where that breakage point is going to be. I do think that many of the solutions are going to come out from the same kind of combination of engineering and computational approaches to what have traditionally been very sort of small c conservative, risk-oriented ways of clinical development.
I think that's really well said. I think the thing I'd add is, the whole process isn't completely broken. There are some things we do for really good reasons, and we want to have the same level of rigor and scrutiny. We're talking about patients. We're talking about people's lives. So there are going to be pieces of this that we can contract. You could talk about clinical development. A year trial is still going to take a year. But at the same time, if we have better predictive models, if we have better, we rely on animal models today, right? Animal models are bad predictors of human biology, generally. There are better techniques that have to be introduced as well, but this all is really disruptive. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying.
Yeah, thank you. Jonathan, Rory, again, continuing kind of the same theme, both of you work at tech companies. What should the biotech and healthcare players do to be more digitally enabled, but also adopt ML in a way that the tech company would be adopting ML? You want to start, Jonathan?
Yeah, it's an interesting comment. You have examples like what Mike has done, where they just from the ground up just did that top to bottom. We have other examples. You're just talking about, and it's the question about how do you do validation, which becomes a really interesting question. There's not an obvious answer to that, right? Except that we need to connect data together in better ways, and we frankly need to do more about how to learn causal inference if we ever want to realize the dream of real-world evidence, for example. It's not obvious how just AI is going to solve that, right? Those are fundamental open questions that we still have there. I think in biotech, one of the places that I think is really interesting that we struggle with a lot is the issue of data silos and how do you break that down. If you start a new company, you can start from scratch and get rid of that. It's a really hard problem for established companies. It's a really hard problem for ecosystems when different players have legitimate business reasons to silo data and really strong privacy reasons to silo data. So how do we think about breaking those down in ethical, safe, compliant ways that still promote business models as well, and whether that's through some of the ideas of federated learning, which I think have a long ways to go before they're really meaningful, but have a lot of promise, to ways that we can securely pull together data and learn on it. There's a bunch of different questions, right? So AI is a new tool in the box, these language models, but they don't actually solve a lot of these questions. They actually raise a whole new set of challenges that we now have to address.
Totally.
Yeah, I think one of the things we think about, like if you look at tech companies, the benefit they have is just they're awash with data, right? They are awash with data. And I think what I'm excited to see, and certain biotech organizations are starting to do this, is they're taking an industrialized approach to data creation, right? And not just creating massive data sets, but also thinking about how do I reduce the cycle time? How do I create low latency between wet lab and dry lab, in silico and in vitro, to be able to drive the next experiment so that you can make your way through biological space and ideally get really high quality candidates into, as you said, the new bottleneck, which is going to be clinical development. So couldn't agree with you more. Massive opportunities for innovations in that space. The other thing that I think about, what's on top of everyone's minds these days is ChatGPT. And I just, as a computational company, obviously we think about how we help organizations outcompute to outcompete, right? It really does take massive data sets, massive compute. And I think that's just something that people are going to have to realize, and there's going to be some bold bettors in this space, much like we've seen in the large language model space to go create what could be the new search. I think we're going to see something similar happen in the world of biology, where there's going to be this, this new large language model that's kind of fueling the search of biology, if you will. And that's, to be honest, it's going to take talented people, significant investment, large computation, and I think over time we'll see, more novel techniques start to approach where you don't need a OpenAI size, Microsoft size, 10,000 GPU cluster, but I do think that is, that is something that biotech is going to have to make a leap towards at some point to see the same massive technology leaps that we've seen in consumer tech.
Yeah,
and just to build on that, if I may, I mean, so that point, not only is it a ton of compute, but it's, GPT is basically trained on the internet, right?
Yes.
And that's all public data that's been pulled together. And it's not obvious to me how we could possibly do that in life sciences, or why we would want to, like, again, from an ethical standpoint as much as from a business standpoint. And so how do we actually enable ourselves to be able to train the right models with the right data sets while still maintaining, and on top of the ethics and the privacy, we know that these models learn all the biases that are in the internet, and it's a big problem. How do you do that in the life science context when we don't even understand the underlying biases to begin with?
So I think this is a really interesting point, actually, that one of the things that's about to happen is that the promise of using computational approaches in biological data sets is going to start hitting up against the challenge of, hey, well, are you capturing the full heterogeneity of the biology here? Do you have East Asian populations in this? Which genomes are you developing this off? Which biobanks and molecular libraries are you utilizing? And the dirty secret of biomedical science and development for the last 300 years, and I say this as a card-carrying physician, is that we never cared about representativeness of our data sets. When we were determining how we understood the pathophysiology of heart disease, we developed all of that learning in men, and then we called it atypical when it happened in women. So these issues of representativeness really come to the fore, and I'm actually an immense optimist that if we can drive that discussion about getting broad, linked, ethically sourced data that really captures the heterogeneity of biology, that actually artificial intelligence, the kind of work that you guys on stage are driving, becomes one of the ways that we start improving equity in biodiscovery. And I just think it's really important because we're going to end up in a space of almost double standards where the science that we allowed to develop over the last 100 of years, which is biased, which has that inbuilt kind of restricted data that we're building it on, is going to be held up as the gold standard. And then what we're trying to do here is going to be held up as being not fully representative. And so how do we manage that social process? How do we get people to trust to share that data so that we can have that representative, equity-enhancing discovery?
I think the only the thing I'd add is we don't really understand a lot about biology, right? Measurement and the tools to measure different pieces of biology are sorely lacking. So, we can talk about artificial intelligence, we can talk about compute, we can talk about all these different things. But if you don't understand the biology, it becomes really hard to crack these problems. I mean, think about neuroscience. We don't know a lot about our brain. And, we don't have ways of measuring sufficiently to understand disease. So part of the innovation that's going to have to come to unlock the full potential here are just better and more distinct and different tools to measure biology at scale.
Yeah. So, just following up on that, Mike, how much of that innovation is going to come from large tech firms versus biotech or healthcare, considering that a lot of the innovation might be ML-based or computationally based?
I think it's going to come from every different sphere. I don't think it's going to be limited to one thing. I think consumer wearables is giving us a lot more data on certain pieces of health. But as you go into academia, it's going to be a huge source of information, of understanding disease. I think industry, biotech will have its places. I don't think it's going to be limited to one domain. I don't think we can afford it to be one orientation trying to solve this. I think it's going to require collaboration across the piece. I think some of the most profound opportunities we have actually sits at these intersections.
Exactly.
Right? A lot of the big companies, the big tech companies, lack real depth in biology.
Yes.
A lot of the big life science companies lack real depth in technology. Academia, depending upon where you are, it's bringing these different groups together that ultimately offers the prospect of real advance.
Yeah,
Totally agree.
great. Jonathan, how is open sourcing going to enable more innovation in the industry? Especially with, Mike, I think January just released Chroma, for example, right? I think it's probably one of the first private companies to open source diffusion-based models. How do you think that's going to change how people innovate, Jonathan?
I mean, it's what we've been doing in tech for a while now, right? I mean, all of these models, the underlying code, certainly the ideas have all been published, they've all been open source. That's not where the secret sauce is at the end of the day. The secret sauce is combining the data. The other side of it is the problem formation, which is what Mike just came up with. Like, the whole industry needs to move forward on how to do algorithms and how to implement that. Where I think a lot of the value creation in is, again, the data, the synthesis, the human stack of how do you combine these things together to really get the end-to-end solutions? How do you get the right problem formation so that you can actually get real answers to biology that we don't understand? So I see open source as just key for just enabling us to just up-level the whole field so we can move faster.
So do you think more private companies are going to start open sourcing what they do?
I don't know. I'd love these guys to take on it, but it depends on the business. It depends on where you're at with this, right? And what part of that stack. I mean, even just to give another example, it might be very valuable to open source the algorithm and implementations so others can play with it. How you actually implement it and optimize it in your context, that might be something that you don't open source as much. Or it might not even be that valuable to others in a different context.
So Mike, maybe I'll just ask you, what was the reason for Generate to put it out there?
Well, I think if you can advance basic science, right? I mean, what Chroma allows you to do is generate novel protein concepts, right? That is not a medicine. There's a whole series of classifiers that were going to be required to actually then optimize those proteins into the ideal therapeutic for an individual's condition. We, clearly thought that we could help advance the field. We clearly thought that it was important for our scientists, recognizing the pace of change within the field. We knew that there were others working on this, in this space. Ultimately, scientists like to publish. And for us to attract the best talent in the world, it was a huge part of the conversation. If they're advancing the field and you watch someone else, you've been working on something for 5 years, and then someone else publishes it and seen as the thought leader in the space, that's pretty dissatisfying. And the challenge is, and Jonathan said it really well, within tech, this is commonplace. Within biotech, we've been very secretive, oftentimes hiding our insights. But you have to really understand at a fundamental level, what is your competitive advantage? Our competitive advantage is not purely the algorithm. We want to be at the forefront of algorithm development, but the reality is our competitive advantage sits at the intersection of the dry lab and the wet lab. And the ability to generate data at scale in those domains. And so for us, this wasn't turning over the competitive advantage of the company, it was really advancing the field, which we will benefit from because others will provide their great ideas, and it'll ultimately enable us to use it in a way that retains our competitive advantage and advances science.
Mike, I loved what you just said though about the effect that it had on your own talent, that people want to work that way and operate that way. And I mean, this is one of those things that differs a little bit. It is beginning to shift in large pharma. They're beginning to understand that the kind of people that you need, like the top 5% computational scientist, machine learning engineer, the kind of person that might be motivated to come and work on these hard problems, also has a way of operating that is much closer to a computational science and engineering concept. If you don't adopt those norms, you don't get the best people. And if you don't get the best people, you'll always be trailing in the wake of other people's innovation.
Absolutely.
And so this is a phenomenal shift that we're sort of seeing in how bioscience happens. And I think there's also a really interesting generational shift that's happening. As more late-stage Gen Z workers come in, especially in these spaces, that approach to pre-competitive collaboration, that approach to actually getting the recognition rapidly from your peers rather than waiting 6 years for that publication or that patent filing, that's going to be a big part of this. And so figuring out how do we adopt to this new shift of expectations of what the people who are really going to drive the science forward want out of their jobs becomes a critical place where actually we can all win if we get it right.
It's just another way of saying brand formation, right? Brand for your company and brand for your individuals.
Absolutely.
And how that all builds.
Exactly. Rory, my second to last question, and something that we at Flagship think a lot about. How should companies think about their infrastructure, especially on-prem, cloud, hybrid, and what is generally the trajectory look like for companies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure on the top of every CEO's mind who sees how expensive technology and compute actually can be when we start to get into this world. The reality is most organizations are going to start off in the cloud. There's so many benefits of cloud computing, from the burstiness of biotech workloads to the availability to the fact that you don't have to stand up a data center on your own. And so I do think that will continue. At NVIDIA, we want to see people consume technology in whichever way makes the most sense for them. I think there's a variety of different cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud type deployments that balance cost and flexibility and freedom. And so I anticipate that hybrid cloud, multi-cloud will take off. I mean, there are laws that we just have to adhere to, the law of physics, the law of data gravity, there's things that will govern where people use compute and how they use infrastructure. But yeah, I think cloud computing is just frankly, it's a godsend for the world that we operate in today. And so I think it's just the way that a lot of organizations will continue to consume this technology.
Great, thank you. My last question to all of you, especially this week here, there has been a lot of talk about, obviously, AI in biological discovery in this panel earlier today too. Some people say it's an overhype and we are just thinking too much. It's going to contribute somewhat, but not necessarily as much as people think. There are some people who say we cannot even comprehend the transformative impact that this is going to have in biological discovery. What are your thoughts? What should we expect next?
I think they're right. I think there's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of, it's become a buzzwordy thing, where everyone tries to attach themselves, and I think you have to really dig to understand who is really substantive in this domain. At the same time, I think I've been shocked by the pace of change this past year. Even with the loftiest of ambitions, I think I will underestimate the progress that will be made over the next 12 months. And so I think both of those seemingly contradictory stances can actually be entirely accurate.
Yeah. Great. Nas?
Biodiscovery is hard. Computational engineering is hard. Getting people to calibrate their expectations at the right level is harder. And I think in and amongst all of the noise of people's aspirations, excitement around this, there are people quietly getting on, taking a long-term view, invested for the next horizon, 10, 15 years, committing their careers, committing their capital. They're going to drive the reality of what comes through. I'm pretty confident that we are going to see that shift happen. I think you're beginning to see in the next 12, 24 months, probably some more good news stories on active milestones from some of the early investments coming through. I think that'll begin to trigger amongst a broader set of investors a different attitude to investing in the space. Look, hubris is just part of progress. We just, like eyes on the prize, if we focus on where we're seeing those milestones come up in the next 12, 24 months, I think you'll begin to see this begin to mature into a place of people now just expecting these things to come through. And then it'll shine a light on all those other places where we have other bottlenecks to solve. But I actually think the next 24 months we transition to a more realized version of success.
Yeah. Thanks. Rory?
Yeah, I think 2023 is going to be a year of validation, right? Can we do what we say we think we can't do? Can we synthesize? Can we get the activity that we're expecting? And I think this is where the leaders are really going to separate themselves from the pack. There's a lot of other companies that are thinking about this, but I think this combination of wet lab, dry lab, expertise, and well thought out planning, I think is really, really important. And then I think it does come down. I have no doubt this will be successful and leaders will emerge, no doubt. But I then think it does come down, now that we have AI miracles like Chroma that truly have turned biology into an engineering discipline, it comes back to what problems are we trying to solve? What are the targets that we're going after? I think what I hear is we've been going after a lot of the same targets as an industry for a long time. What are the next ripe set of targets that is greenfield for us that actually are going to have positive outcomes for these new, interesting, and hopefully highly active potential therapies that are coming to market. So yeah, this will be a very telling year, I think. I think it will be.
Jonathan?
You guys all said it well. To me right now, we are clearly in a transformational stage at a level that I don't think even most AI researchers are comprehending, but we also don't understand the scope of it. And so trying to understand where that fits, there's going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit that gets knocked out really quickly. I can't predict where that is, and I think there's going to be a lot of places where we think there's low-hanging fruit, and it turns out to be way harder than we thought it was. And so, trying to figure out how we navigate that, and coming back to the validation, where are there places in the life sciences where we can really validate and iterate on this? How do we layer causal inference on that? Those are all big questions for me. The other big one that to me is a shift, I don't know how to predict this, is in the past I would think of AI, so like Microsoft's role in AI is to come up with new algorithms and provide the compute, let you own the data and the insights. What happens when we need to start combining data more and more? This old model led to whole business models where people would pre-train foundation models, and then you had a marketplace for that. But what does that look like when that starts combining together, when the compute is so expensive that you can't read? There's just a bunch of open questions, and I don't think we understand the bounds of that once we don't even understand it for language. We definitely don't understand it once we move outside of language.
Exactly. Well, gentlemen, and I thank all of you, and I probably won't be incorrect to recap and say that our imagination probably will be one of the main limiting factors in what we are going to come up with next. So I wish all of us a more imaginative future. And thank you again, and hope to see you again soon.
All set. Thank you. Thank you.